Hello, innovators. I'm Todd and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is KP Reddy. He's the founder and CEO of Shadow Ventures, a seed stage technology investment firm. He's a globally recognized authority in AEC environments, AI, robotics, automation, mobile applications, and cloud computing. He's also a frequent lecturer at Georgia Tech and is a sought-after subject matter expert, frequently speaking worldwide on BIM and the built environment. Welcome to the show, KP.
Hey, Todd. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. So how did you get into the world of construction to begin with?
I'll start with that, but just to be clear, my bio, that bio you read out is about 10 years old. So I didn't just add AI on it today.
Nice. the buzzword of the moment.
Right, exactly. It's an old bio. How did I get into I'm a second generation civil engineer. And at some point in high school, kind of early days of high school, my dad bought an IBM PC and said, do something with it. So started programming for him on it. And then from there, really started learning how to do stuff in the field, everything. I think I was surveying by the time I was 14 and could inspect rebar when I was 15. So just kind of grew up in the business, so to speak. And then went to school at Georgia Tech, started off as aerospace. And then they told me that I'd have to get a master's degree and go work for the government, not make much money. So that didn't seem like
Doesn't sound like much fun. Yeah.
It's
like not a good sales pitch.
Yeah, 2 more years of school and drudgery, and you make something around minimum wage. So ended up transferring into civil. So did that and worked as a civil engineer, and that's how I got into it.
Yeah. What was the transformation like going from civil engineering into construction technology?
Well, so my first startup. So one I had the benefit of when I was at Georgia Tech, my advisor was the first one to put classes on the internet, kind of 1992. And I was like his coding monkey. So got early exposure there. And then I started a tech startup in 1997, which was construction management on the web. So I was already like writing code and doing stuff, nights and weekends. But I launched that company and we started to run out of money when the contractors told me the internet was like for entertainment purposes and had no real use in business. It was for play, and pivoted into telecom and was super fortunate. The telecom people were a little bit more enlightened than that, and was able to grow that company from 2 people to 1,200 and take it public and all that good stuff.
Yeah, nice. It's funny how short-sighted we can be, stuck in our own little bubbles and not seeing the big tsunami wave coming at you. How would you define a successful technological transformation, especially for construction?
Like currently what's been?
Yeah. What does it look like to you on how to do that well?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think, we look at this, we say construction, and it's like this monolith, right? And when we're working with the very large firms, their idea of innovation and transformation is very different than the person running around in a truck and has a shoebox full of receipts from Home Depot, right? So that we can define all of that as construction. But I do think, we went from, for those of you that are maybe around my age, the Nextel phone and the push-to-talk feature was probably the most innovative thing in its time for job sites. Mm-hmm. You no longer had local radio bands. It was literally your cell phone was also a walkie-talkie. And you saw people, the equivalent of group chats, were setting up group messaging on that, and you could broadcast to a group of people what was going on. And so that was like the beginning of, call it, improved communication from the job site versus running over to the job trailer, getting paged, maybe running over to the job trailer. And then from there, we just went to the BlackBerry and the smartphone. And I think you go to a job site now and I don't think there's people with flip phones. Maybe there are. And then you start seeing like how people are using smartphones to communicate. One of the highest used apps on a job site is WhatsApp. So even though it may not be corporate sanctioned or whatever, the crews are talking to each other via WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's been, we take it for granted. If you're not on a job site every day, we take all these devices for granted. But I think it's had a bigger impact than people, they kind of gloss over it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the a recent guest said the line that I thought was really good around innovation, that you can't compare innovations against each other. That what's innovative, you said about the construction, we group them all together, but that's a big range in there. And what's innovative for the Fortune 500 is going to be drastically different than what's innovative for the guy in the truck. To your point on that has the receipts in the box. That's a big range, and you got to keep on making kind of those small steps, no matter where you are on that journey. You can still be innovative. You don't have to go all the way to the deluxe Cadillac package for the guy in the truck.
Yeah.
What do you think is a challenge right now, kind of hindering progress in the industry on the technological side?
Yeah, I think on the tech side, when you have nascent markets, you have the formation of incumbent software players. And those incumbent software players tend to take market share, and the incremental benefit for them to invest more money into innovation versus just milk the markets that they're in, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's these are public companies whose CEO's job is to turn revenue into earnings. Like that's their job, right? So you can't fault them for running a good business. But what happens is the market gets ensconced in these platforms, and it's really hard. The switching costs are really hard for them. Not from a money perspective per se, but from an intellectual perspective, from a training perspective. We saw it in the '90s with SAP and Oracle. They just kind of owned the markets in the ERP space, and it became really hard until Salesforce came along. Was it really hard to get into these enterprises because they'd kind of gotten settled in? So I think we're dealing with that right now, where it's really hard for really progressive innovation. Companies that are judged on being innovative and being differentiated, like that's all they worry about. Finding space in the technology stack. The Procores, Autodesk, et cetera, right? Name the list. They're not really worried about product differentiation anymore, right? They don't have to. That's not the job. So I think that's what's really you're starting to see is like, how do new white spaces get created so that you can actually deliver innovation, at its best and at the right time.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point too, on that there's so much technology coming out and coming at people, especially in construction right now, that it can easily fall into the technology fatigue. What are some kind of telltale signs for you of people that are starting to lean into that technology fatigue? And then what are some strategies that organizations can really adopt to alleviate that fatigue among their staff?
Yeah, I think, it's this weird double-edged sword, right? By its sheer virtue, construction, you give people a lot of autonomy, right? The superintendent, the project engineer, whoever, is given, the leadership says, deliver the project on time, on budget, and you get to keep your job. And I might throw you a couple bucks as a bonus. Like that's the job. But they're not as quick to dictate the how. And in fact, we see this interesting dynamic when quote unquote corporate dictates to the field, you shall use X product. They don't agree, like automatically. If corporate said we should use it, if those people that live in the office say we should use it, then it must be terrible. Automatically, right? So there's definitely like bias around that. So I think the strategy has to be building guardrails to let people have autonomy And we've built these programs before for especially large general contractors, is make it very collaborative, build guardrails around what they can use, and almost create your own private app store. Mm-hmm. Like, I understand you don't want to use this one punch list tool because God knows, I mean, there's like thousands of punch list tools out there, right? There's just tons of them, including the homegrown punch list tools, right? That somebody built with Wufoo forms or some nonsense, right? So you have all those things. So you kind of say, like, I'm not going to mandate you use one, but you have to use one of these three. And we've curated these three through our teams in the field. The CIO, God forbid the CIO picked them, because then automatically it's terrible, right? But we worked with the field folks, and these are the three that we narrowed it down to. And you guys need to stick to these three. Now, if you find something new that you think is better, happy to look at it. Like, there is a process to drive change. And so I think it's that balancing of command and control against like reckless autonomy that you have to balance against.
Mm-hmm. Why is achieving that consistency in workflows and having a limited tech stack, if you will, so pivotal for really scaling across not just an individual project, but across the company wide for a construction firm?
There's a couple things. One, besides consistency and all that good stuff, when you work with small companies, there is inherent risk. And from the time this airs, another half dozen construction tech startups will go out of business. There are literally, like, because we get to know, right? It's my job to know. There are half a dozen startups that a year ago, oh my gosh, these people, they're the best. They're doing this. They raised around. They're done. Like, they're out of business. They're done. And that's the risk you take. However, you can mitigate risk if you have a focused few, right? If you have, so if you're deploying 20 tech startups across your stack, look, I'm in the venture business. 1 in 10 makes it. It's power law. That's the world. So if you have 20 apps across your stack, only 2 of those are going to be around in a few years. So how do you mitigate that risk? How do you understand, like, what my transition plan is? Like, all those things. And you can't do it. So at least if you have a chosen few and something goes awry, you can actually build a transition plan. You can, there's one of the big corporates basically shut down all their innovation products and shut down the companies, and all the customers are left holding the bag. And they come to me like, "Hey, Pete, do you want to take it over?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Like, just shoot it already. It's done." And so I think that's part of the risk mitigation. If you're too fragmented with a lot of choices, it's going to be really hard to mitigate risk.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's speak to the leaders for a moment. How do they really champion and then rally their teams around this technological shift and get them not just begrudgingly using the tech stack, but excited about the tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, I think part is you have to make them part of the process. I'm super. I wake up every morning, just feeling grateful for the people I have around me. Right, I have almost 100 LPs that are from the industry. I don't have to know. I mean, I know a lot, but I don't have to know everything. I have lots of people to lean on. Right, I can call 10 GCs tomorrow to ask, like, their CEOs, like, what do you think about? And I get like a text answer that day. Like, I mean, it's super amazing, right? And so I think it's so important to, like, collaborate, engage, and listen to people. And if you're a CIO, I don't care how big a firm you are, if you're not listening to the people in the field and the users, like, let's not forget, CIOs do not build buildings. They are a customer service organization to the people in the field. Mm-hmm. That's how they have to think, and that's how they have to remember their position and what it takes to serve the customer. Their clients are the people in the field, so they have to engage with them. It's like building a product without talking to your customer, right? It never gets anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that they engage with them and have that kind of client-centric view of their users.
Yeah. How do you start building in the confidence then for the tech stack? If, to your point of 1 in 10 aren't around in a few years,
And 1 in 10 make it.
1 in 10 make it. I'm sorry. Yep. 1 in 10 make it. 90% aren't around in a few
Yeah.
years. How do you build the confidence that if I'm going to invest my time learning this new tech stack and really diving into it, what's the kind of the guarantee for me, or what's in it for me if I'm just going to have to do this all again in another couple of years when the next hottest thing comes along?
Well, I mean, there's the benefit of being able to use the innovation to make your life easier in the near term. And I think, look, not every company should subject themselves to risk across their entire organization. That's why you pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, if you ask yourself the question is like, what happens if we don't use this? And it's like, well, not much of anything. Then you should question whether you're using it. If the answer is like, well, we're not going to get you more work, or we might lose our shirts on a job, then all of a sudden the risk is worth it. It was like early days of BIM, right? Early days of BIM, nobody was convinced. Nobody was convinced. Period. They're still not convinced, right?
Yeah,
they're still not convinced. It's
you
like
your pockets.
It's an expensive drafting tool, fantastic, right? So, but like I said, there's still a lot of people that are unconvinced, and I think you're always going to deal with a little bit of that. But what's the option? Well, the option was in 2003, 4, 5, whenever I was doing BIM stuff, you're not going to do work for the GSA if you can't do BIM. Well, I guess I better do BIM, right? Like there's no question there. Now, if you're a firm that didn't do work for the GSA, maybe you said, I don't need to do BIM. I don't do work for the GSA. And so, so I think these are business decisions. They aren't technology decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's kind of double click into how do you implement the technology well? You got the confidence, you're bought in, you have your kind of limited tech stack, you got your guardrails up. What are some of the kind of fundamental building blocks that a company needs to have in place in order for the implementation to go as smoothly as possible?
So the number one thing that companies do poorly, that is the most important thing, is communication. The minute I'm saying down to the receptionist, if you call the receptionist and say, hey, what is your BIM strategy? The receptionist needs to know, right? So when you're doing these new things, there's naysayers that actually don't believe in what's happening. They don't believe in it. And there's other people that are naysayers because they were left out of it. Like, well, I wasn't included, so it must suck, right? So it's like bad attitude, right? Mm-hmm. But if you clearly communicate in a predictable cadence, people start to buy in. They're not wondering, hey, why does that guy not have to work on projects? He's over there in the office all the time working on some AI, something or another, right? The people that have to keep rowing the boat look at the guys that are doing this innovation stuff and say, they're not rowing the boat. I'm paying their salaries. My job is producing the cash flow to pay for that person. And what are they doing? And so, number one, you got to communicate well, frequent, consistent, clearly and transparently. 2, you have to educate people on the finer points. Mm-hmm. And then 3, you have to create power user evangelists. And the challenge with power user evangelists in your organization is, unfortunately, the nerdier they are, the poorer evangelists they become. So you have to find people that are super balanced, that can speak English to the masses, that have the enthusiasm, that don't do the I know something you don't know and you're a dumbass type attitude.
Right.
Right. Kind of that classic IT person persona. Right.
Right. Did you just restart?
Yeah. Like, what are you doing? Move over. That thing. So I think picking those power users that are going to evangelize are super important. And I will tell you, there's this weird trend that you see the power users. They are spending more time speaking at conferences outside of their organization than within their organization. I.e., they're just like promoting themselves for their next job. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it's important to have these folks have regular cadence and sessions in-house to the team, show and tell, whatever you call. So I think that all that stuff's important. But communication is the biggest.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good gut check on the champion. Are they spending as much or more time internal championing it versus being out on the speaking circuit, if you will? That's a great gut check.
Yeah.
For sure. And on the communication angle, I more than agree with you. I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of construction companies make with technology adoption is they use the selling point that got the C-suite bought in on the product, and they just use that same talking points to every single stakeholder throughout the company, and people don't care unless they're in that C-suite stuff. But the end user in the field, they're like, yeah, okay, well, it's good for this guy, but it's causing me, an hour extra work every single day.
Yeah.
It's a pain in my neck.
Right.
What's the benefit for me?
Yeah. I'm glad, Mr. CEO, you get your reports in a timely manner. But how does that helps me how?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. We got to be able to speak their language, and hopefully if you're doing it right and they're part of it on the beginning, you already have what's going to excite them and what they're looking for. So you have those hooks that you can go to later when you're implementing it to say, hey, this is what you taught about when we were looking for a solution, and here's the benefits that we found from this solution, and they match up. I think that's when you really start to hit that power aspect of it. Let's kind of pivot a bit on not the technology adoption side, but go into the tech providers. How can competitors of you have your technology? How can you start really collaborating with your competitor to help push the industry forward? And maybe should you even think about that space of the co-opetition?
You mean on like on the construction firm side?
On the tech provider side.
On the tech provider side.
Yeah.
So the challenge is, I think the tech providers really have to think about earning their customers' business every day, right? And I think that's where people get very comfortable. Microsoft got comfortable, and then Google came along, right? There's lots of case studies around this, and so I think there's this comfort that people get into, and I think when it comes to collaborating, we've talked about BIM interoperability. We've talked about all these things in the past, right? And none of it happens. Everybody kind of gives lip service, right? Bentley wants to protect their DOT government clients, and Autodesk wants to protect their commercial clients. And what it starts to become is paramount to a shared monopoly. And they're okay with that, right? There is no incentive driver, because every time one of them tries to edge into each other's spot, they get their hands smacked by the customers. They're like, oh, well, we invested $100 million to go into the government space and we got nowhere. Let's not do that again. So I think, interoperability and working together, I don't think it happens naturally. You can't sit there and build a culture of saying, we have to win. We have to beat our competitors. Let's go. And then one day flip the switch, like, well, we need to be more allies.
Right. It's a hard mindset.
Yeah, my team has to remind me. I'm hyper competitive, like unreasonably competitive, right? When I had taken a sabbatical for 3 years and was doing yoga twice a day. 3 weeks in, I'm like, how do I win? I don't understand. Like, who's keeping score, right? Like, no, you don't keep score in yoga. I'm like, what do you mean? What's the point then? Right?
I'm out.
I'm out. Like, what's going on here? I can totally do crow better than that guy. Like, right. Why is his mat at the front of the room? So I think it's really hard to change that. I mean, you want competition. And what I would say is, I would be happier if the incumbents competed with each other than collaborated with each other. Mm. I would be more excited about that. I want them to go after each other. because that makes both of them better and that helps the industry. The problem is cooperation in large markets can sometimes just create laziness, right? It's like, well, what do we have that's equal to what they have?
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
think that's good for the industry.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, competition across the board, no matter what space you are in, it goes back to the iron sharpens iron aspect of it too. That when you go up against the best, you got to be the best in order to take them down. So you're going to be more focused on kind of back to where we started with the conversation. You're going to be focused on those innovative software features because you're going to have to if you're going to go up against the best and try to outcompete them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. How can industry leaders create an environment that kind of then puts that competition in a healthy, maybe friendly way? But how do you put that competition out front to say, no, we're putting our flag in the ground. We're gonna be the best here, and we're gonna go after it.
Mm-hmm. So I have the good fortune of dealing with most of the industry leaders, right? We all get together once a year. We get together in the next month at our summit, and it's like CEOs, and we collaborate. And the reason we do it in October is because we try to set the agenda for next year. Like, what areas should we be focused on as an industry, right? So I get call it 200 of our friends to show up, and we talk about these things. And I think what the software industry is missing, the providers are missing. 0% of these CEOs are happy with them. 0%. They are like, this is what I have to deal with. This is what I have. And it's, we can name the names, but it doesn't really matter because they're all the same. Like there's none of them that are standing out, right? And they are starting to self-organize. They are starting to understand. They are starting to build plans to say, hey, we need to get off this platform in 5 years. What's the strategy? Why are we working with a firm, with a technology provider that's really not helping us anymore? They're making it harder. And I'm probably the first one to kind of say, hey, hold on. If all you're talking about them increasing if you're talking about price increases, and that is the crux of like why you're unhappy with them, you're focused on the wrong things, right? If it's beyond that, then there's a conversation to be had. So that they are self-organizing, right?
Yeah. What do you think will get the attention of those tech providers to force change, if you will?
They won't see it coming. It'll happen slow and then it'll start slow and happen fast. I don't think, Microsoft in the 90s thought, you think they saw Apple as a threat? You think they saw Google as a threat? Nothing. And then all of a sudden. So I don't think they have a move, right? I don't think they have a move. I think it's really going to be how they look inward and continue to innovate. Microsoft's a good example because if you look at Microsoft pre-Satya Nadella days, it's a different company. Satya Nadella days is very different than pre-Satya Nadella days, and it looks a lot more like Bill Gates days in terms of the focus on the right people. Look, all these big tech companies in our space are out. You could cut half the staff and nothing would change. They are massive jobs programs.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing with big tech, Facebook lays off a bunch of people. Wow. Nothing changed.
Right.
Elon Musk got what, 90% of Twitter? I haven't complained about Twitter because I don't get on it that. Like, it's like it works enough when I'm on it, right? Like It's good enough. And how much do I pay for it? $0. Fantastic, right? So I think there's definitely like big company bloat in all these companies, and there's 100 evangelists running around and market managers. The number of titles that don't actually drive revenue is astonishing, right? Core to startup world is you're either selling or building. There's only two jobs. There's no other jobs. If you took the org charts of these big companies and had to put seller or seller or builder, that's maybe 20% of the company.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is just a bunch of people hanging around the hoop. So I think what they'll have to start figuring out is how do they get lean? How do they get the right people engaged in their organization that are actually to go off and build stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, makes sense. So as we look to the future, what excites you the most about the intersection of technology and construction and actually, building the building?
Yeah. So I think, so if we look at two sides, right, we have designers, right, which are doing all kinds of wild stuff. I used to work for Frank Gehry, so I know what wild looks like, right? And then you have builders. And the builders have said, hey, we're going to focus on industrialized construction. And we're going to focus on building things in factories because that's the future, which I don't disagree with, right? The problem there is they've said, but we're going to only make 3 SKUs. We're not going to build a lot of things. We're only building hotel rooms. We're only building hospital rooms. And you get them in three layouts. That's what they look like, right? So they've had to optimize configuration and customization to a narrow band. And then you have designers that say, okay, well, everything needs to be special and unique and, iterative, right? It's like SDs, DDs, CDs. We have to go through this process, and that process of iteration of budget, budget scope and need for the customer. That's what we're iterating through. And so these folks are working. So here's highly custom. Here's, you get it in 3 colors kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. What I think is exciting is if you insert AI on the design stack and you insert robots on the manufacturing stack, now you have mass customization, which means you have the ability to have highly custom designs mass manufactured. And that's what's happening right now. That is the intersection of what's happening. And that is tremendously exciting. The idea that you can have a custom designed home that will be built in 90 days, cheaper and better, right? So I was giving this AI talk to, it was like the top 60 CEOs in the engineering space. Like, what do you think about AI? And they're like, what do you think about bias? I'm like, you mean like human bias? They're like, no, AI bias. I'm like, I can deal with AI bias. Human bias, I don't know how to begin to solve for. Right? They're like, what about these self-driving cars? They're running into people. I'm like, literally the curve of being a good driver. You're a terrible driver at 16. And about the time you become a great driver, you become a bad driver again when you're 18, right? Machines only get better. Computers only get better. So if we think we're going to get, we're never going to be that. So when you think about the computers and robots, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. They're going to be designing cheaper and faster and better, and understand the outcomes, right? A designer can't even design a building by identifying the operating costs. If I'm an owner and all I care about is operating costs, ask an architect, what are my operating costs going to be in year 10? They have no answers. In other words, come buy my car. I can't tell you what the service, how often you have to get it serviced, and I can't tell you how many miles per gallon it'll give you. But trust me, you want this car. And so when you think about the power of what's happening on the design side with AI, is to be able to run predictive models around design affecting operating costs, replacement costs, custom, just being able to design on the fly. In other words, there is no DD and CD. There's only CD. And that CD is being pushed to a robot. And by the way, if the customer changes their mind a week in, there's not an RFI and a change order. There's an updated command to the robot. So that's exciting to me, is that you now have automation on both sides.
Yeah.
On both sides of the dumbbell, so to speak.
What do you think that timeline is to get to
5
that
years.
reality?
5
really?
years.
Nice.
Yeah, 5 years.
That's awesome. So that's very innovative, centered around most of the conversation today. What does innovation, what does that mean to you?
I like to steal the definition. Peter Diamandis wrote a great book called Abundance. And if you haven't read it, I always tell people you should read it yourself and make your kids read it too. It's a fantastic book. And if you don't know Peter Diamandis, he's the X Prize guy. He's a fantastic human being. So Peter wrote this book called Abundance, and in it he says, innovation is something that takes something that was once scarce and makes it abundant. So the example he uses is like picking apples on a tree. You can only pick so many apples within reach, and then somebody innovates a ladder, and now you get to pick all the apples. Mm-hmm. And so I think I read that and I said, you know what, this is the definition. I don't care what, I'm just going to adopt it. This is the innovation. And so I think that's, in our space, when you look at scarcity of resources, whether it's human resources, material resources, energy resources, that's what innovation is. How do you take something that is scarce and create abundance? That's what innovation does.
Yeah, I like it. And I always love a good book recommendation. So I'll go check out that book for sure. How do people find out more information on what you have going on and connect with you?
Our ventures website is shadow.vc. And I would say like our research and events website is shadowpartners.co. That's where you can find out more. Summit is, it's super interesting. It's definitely, you have to apply. We curate who's allowed in and that kind of thing. We have kind of like the no salesman rule. But it's a perfect venue if you're either C-suite or your full-time job is innovation and you are part of the strategic planning process. It's a great venue for you because literally people take copious notes and then go back as they start, November strategic planning for the following year. They literally start citing the information they get at our summit to do that strategic planning.
Yeah. Awesome. And that's happening in October. You said October, the summit.
Yeah. Shadowsummit.com.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, last question for you. If I could give you all power and you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the construction industry, what would you pick to innovate?
I have an easy answer. I think it's safety. I find it's the one thing that we can all agree upon, like whether it is physical safety, mental safety. There's just, these are people that are giving so much of their time and energy to build our communities, right? To build our livelihoods, build our society. And, I remember going to see the Hoover Dam and they had the stats of how many people died and that was like acceptable, right? That was just like built into the budget, so to speak. Right. And we look at it now and we're like, people are still dying. And then, and then you throw like mental health against that and it's like even worse. So I just think that we don't give enough credit for the work that people put into this stuff. And instead we want to we want to idolize Elon Musk. And then there's these people that are doing shit that really matters, building the schools that our kids go to school in, stuff like that. And so if I could snap my fingers and make our industry safe, that's what I would do.
It's a great one. It's a great one for sure. Yeah. All the points that you just said, I totally agree with. Yeah, well, we're going to snap and make that happen. KP, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Absolutely. It's good to see you.